what is the time genre for this short story? Is it short, long, or medium?
And I put short because when I went back to the definitions, long form is feature length films, documentaries, novels, or 3 acts or more plays. Medium form is episodic television shows or documentaries, novellas, multi-thousand word journalism, 1-act plays. And short form was short film, short stories, or individual scenes in a play. And so I put short form since this is a short story that's, I think, what is it, around 1,200 words, something like that?
Yeah. One of the ways to think about time is to think about how long the progression of the story is, right? So if you had a short story and there are cuts, meaning you move from one particular event to another one which is in another arena or another environment, that would be a longer form story than just a single scene. Now, in the Ed McBain story, what's really fun is that it's a single event that happens over a continuous set of time. It compresses certain events into smaller units that, for example, there are times when the narrator will just explain and describe a series of events that happen in one sentence. So the time genre itself is pretty interesting, and you really need to think about it as a writer. For example, the duration of Pride and Prejudice, I think, is over a period of about 15 to 16 months. And there are clear delineations of that time period. Anyway, so the time genre Leaf Clover can get a lot more high resolution than this sort of coarse look, but this is a good place to start.
Just to play off of what you were saying, Sean, we do collapse this into these 3 categories. Although, as you alluded to with the short story that has more scenes in it, it is really a spectrum. And so we want to keep it simple and keep it to these 3 categories. If we focus on why we look at this and why we categorize stories in this way, getting at what you're talking about comparing the duration of the play of the story to the duration of the audience's experience of reading the story gives us some constraints on what the audience will expect, how much we can do, what kind of messages we can communicate to the audience. So I think this is one of those questions that it seems really simple to categorize it, but it's very important when you're writing, especially to know going in what kind of limitations you're putting on yourself so that you can construct your story in a way that's effective for your reader.
Yeah. And just to give the spectrum of what that looks like is that you have A Rose for Emily, which is a story. It's a short story. So in terms of what the reader is actually reading is short, but it spans generations. And then you have a story like Finnegan's Wake that is a huge, really long story, but it spans a very short period of time within those bounds. And that determines a lot of constraints for your story. And it's something you want to understand going in.
That's really great, because what the two of you just delineated was the difference between the audience's experience reading the story versus the simulation itself. So the description and explanation of the story through the point of view of the author. And that distinction that you just made, Leslie, between Rose for Emily and Finnegan's Wake, what you have there is Finnegan's Wake is this massive novel that takes place in a very short amount of time. And then you have a very short story that takes place in a very large spectrum of duration. So the experience of the audience member is one thing to consider. And then the execution and the description and explanation by the author to that audience member is the other thing to take into consideration. So short, long, and medium, I've been using it in this 5-leaf clover, more talking about the experience of the single audience member as opposed to the execution by the author.